I don't want our people to just be stressed all the time. Like there's some stress to just work, but I want them to go home at the end of the day and to feel good about their day and to feel good about having interactions with their spouse or kids or significant others. And then to wake up the next morning and feel like they want to go to work. I don't want them to have these Sunday night syndromes of dreading. And if they just kind of work less, that's okay too.
Welcome back to the podcast. I'm glad you're here. Today, John Jennings returns. Longtime listeners of the podcast know that John Jennings runs a family office that helps ultra high net worth individuals manage their money and enabling them to pass down their wealth to future generations. One of the most interesting things about John is that he's such a deep researcher. He's written one book and is about to publish a second book for people that want to know about money. This current book that he's written is for strivers. That is the people that aspire to get to a higher level of wealth. What happens when you get there? What is going to bring you happiness? This is a fascinating conversation, and it ranges all across the board from AI to nonfiction and fiction to even a conversation about religion. We're going to get to that conversation in just a moment. But one thing you'll notice is that John references that we came and delivered a class to his company, Archbridge. This is called Interest-Based Communication, and it's where I teach people how to have a professional relationship with others, how to have the kind of communication that allows you to negotiate through problems, to be able to deal with conflict, have deeper conversations, and tell stories about who you are and your organization. If you are interested in having me come teach a course to your organization and helping them to become better leaders and communicators, go to articulate.ventures/IBC. All right, without further ado, let's head to this conversation with John Jennings. So just yesterday, the interview, a very quiet woman, and she was like, "Oh, I don't know how you can stand to listen to people all day long tell their stories." And I'm like, "You don't understand. This is I'm on the edge of my seat. I'm totally focused because as long as you're really listening to somebody, it is not hard at all to focus. It's the flow state."
Yeah, I think it is. And I say that to my therapist. I say, how do you do this? He sees 7 or 8, 9 patients a day. And he spends 45 minutes seemingly, I'm sure he wonders every now and then, but seemingly totally focused. He's a professional listener and then knows when to ask the right question. And you know what he does that's really good is mirroring, which is one thing that you taught us at the seminar that you gave to our company, which is to mirror it back. And I can tell that he's doing it, but I still find it so satisfying, even though I'm like, oh, Dr. Brog is mirroring,
Well, that's the funniest thing. So when I teach about mirroring, just the other day I was with a bunch of ag guys, right? They're ag retail salesmen. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to teach you guys this technique where whatever you hear the other person saying, you are not allowed to ask them another question. All you do is repeat back what you heard them say. And they're kind of rolling their eyes or whatever. But then you have them do it and they realize one, this is really hard because it requires me not to be like, oh, okay, I thought of this thing, I'm going to reply back to them. And you actually have to stay focused with them. And then when somebody does it back to you, it feels so good to hear your stuff said back to you.
It's so satisfying. And I know he's doing it and he does it a lot and it's still so satisfying. And I'm just like, this is a big part of what I'm paying for is someone to just listen to me for 45 minutes in a focused way, validate, and then repeat back. And then every once in a while to have some good advice. But it's really knowing which question to ask is a big part. And he's been trained, he's a psychoanalyst. Okay. So yeah, there's all sorts of different types. So the attention I think is so important. So my upcoming book's on wealth and happiness. And if you boil all the research down on what it means to be happy and then how to be happier. And again, happiness isn't just pleasure in the moment. That's part of it. But part of it is life satisfaction. But if you boil it down, I've come up with what I call the good life equation. And there's 2 parts to it. There's the foundation side, which includes financial security. So, money definitely helps with that. And then there's, physical and mental health and other things like that. But then there's the flourishing side, which mainly has three main things, and it's relationships and flow and meaning. So, and if you have both of those sides, the foundation and the flourishing, then you're doing, pretty well. But the problem is we focus a lot on, by we, I mean most humans, particularly strivers, of which I'm one, we tend to focus a lot on the foundation side because it's measurable and you can go and you achieve things. You're like, oh, I feel good about this or that I've achieved. But on the flourishing side, on the relationships, I'm not going to write a book on relationships, nor am I the expert that could be, that I've studied relationships. But for each of these things, I just have a few suggestions. And here's where you come into play, because I mentioned you in the book. So years ago, I was at a party, and it was probably like 15 years ago. And it was, my kids went to Ladue School District, elementary school and middle school. So it was like some sort of parent party. So I'm talking to this woman, let's call her Janet. And I didn't know her very well. If you do your social life in these concentric circles, she was in level 3, right? I knew her to say hi. I knew her husband, let's call him Jacob. But anyway, they were getting divorced. So she had a few glasses of wine. I'd had a few beers. So we're talking. And as divorced people or getting divorced people do, they tell you all about their divorce, right? Because I think it's so painful and they just want to get it out there. So anyway, this woman that I don't know very well is telling me about her divorce. And she says to me at one point, do you know why Jacob and I are getting divorced? And I was like, no. And she said, it's because he doesn't know what women want. And I was like, oh, wow. I don't know that I know what women want either.
High bar.
And she's like, she turns to me, she's like, John, it's not that hard. What women want is two things. I mean, there's other than two things, but two main things. If you screw this up, you're not going to have a good relationship. It's kind of her point. She goes, they want attention and affection. And Jacob sucks at both of those things. And so I didn't give it much thought at the time, because I then was kind of trying to politely extract myself from her divorce story. But I thought about it later, and I'm like, that is literally what everybody wants, right? Everybody wants attention, and then everybody wants affection. So in my book, I just talk a bit about those two things. And on the affection side, I talk about, not scientifically researched, but the 5 love languages. So, what I realized there is I like words of affirmation. I like to be complimented, right? And in fact, so much so that my mother-in-law, may she rest in peace, told my wife a week before our marriage, are you sure you want to marry this boy? Because he needs constant affirmation and to be told how great he is. And I'm worried that it's going to exhaust you. And for the record, it does exhaust you. But my wife, so I would tell her throughout our marriage, all these great things about her, but that wasn't moving the needle for her. What for her, what it is, primarily acts as service, right? And it took me a long time to realize that. Okay, but on the attention side, so probably the second podcast I was ever on was with you. And, I didn't know you well. I think we had just met. Maybe we'd had coffee or something. But you put me instantly at ease. And then, in fact, to this day, I think it's probably the best podcast I've been on. And it's because, again, almost like my therapist, you just totally paid attention. I remember asking you afterwards about you and paying attention, and you're just like, oh, I find people interesting. And then as you know, your wife's my physical therapist, and she's a total witch doctor. And I mentioned once how great the podcast was with you and how interested you are in other people. And Anne said, your wife, she said, Vance is this rare person that just genuinely finds other people interesting. He's curious about other people, right? And so I talk about you in my book about, how important that is to be actually interested in other people. And it's this course that you taught our firm, that being interested is better than being interesting, right? And that really struck me, because I try to be interesting, and it's really partly through researching this book that I'm like, oh, I need to be more interested. So like your course that you did for our firm came along at the exact right time, because it just really gave me a better kind of paradigm to think about. And so I try to stop myself and say, oh, am I being interested in what this person's saying? And there's this type of therapy called dialectical behavior therapy. And this was developed by the psychologist to help patients that were suffering from depression, adolescents really, and personality disorders and things. And what dialectical means is it means basically that opposing things can be true at the same time. So her name is Marsha Linehan, and in her therapy, she said, what we have to do is accept ourselves the way we are and realize that we're trying the best we can and that we're good people, but also recognize we could be doing better. There are things that we can work on to improve ourselves. And so there's all these different modules to dialectical behavioral training, but therapy. But one of them, and there's skills, and they all have these acronyms. And one of them has to do with interpersonal skills. And this one skill that she teaches is called the give skill. And here's what it stands for. G stands for gentle. So approach conversations with a gentle manner. Don't be overly intense. Don't be aggressive. Just be gentle. I, interested. So act interested if you're not interested. So fake it till you make it. And this is so important, to be interested. V is to validate. So again, this gets into what you've taught about mirroring and validation, but don't try to solve their problems. When somebody is talking to you about issues or stories or whatever, don't jump in and try to solve it, and just say, that sounds really tough, or that's really hard, or, I understand what you're saying, right? And then E, sort of like be gentle again. It's adopt an easy manner. Smile. Have your facial expressions and your body language at a certain extent. So anyway, I learned about this because my kids went through this DBT training, and the parents go to these group meetings, and you learn some of it. And so I learned this skill, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I am not great at any of these things. I'm always trying to solve people's problems instead of validating them, and I'm not acting interested enough. I'm waiting to be able to say like the next thing. I think can be overly intense, So what happens now is when like coworkers come into my office, and maybe I'm in the middle of something else, I close my laptop, and I just said, I walk through give. And then with my kids, with friends, with my spouse, I don't do it all the time. I'm not perfect, but it's this great way that has helped me have more attention towards people. So it gets back to what Janet was saying, attention and affection. It's the attention part of things. So the give skill. So there you go.
Well, I love it. The thing that's striking in my brain is the thing that I don't think I came up with it. I don't know that I could say exactly where I did, but your attention is the most valuable thing that you own. It's like you can only pay attention to one thing at a time. And when you give it to someone else, they can feel it. And when you are pretending to give it to somebody else, they can also feel that. There's It's this, that's what all of social media is trying to grab from you. That's what advertisements are trying to grab. It's like, because your brain can only handle, I think you and I have talked about this, you can only talk about one thing. You can only focus on one thing at a time. You think you can focus on multiple things, but you can't. You're like trying to dial between them. And so if your attention is the most valuable thing you own and you give it to someone else, that in and of itself has a very powerful impact on the energy between two people.
Yeah. You've talked about multitasking. I think you talked about how many items you can hold in your working memory, and it was based on this paper that has, I think, one of the greatest names in all scientific papers. It's called, I may not get it exact, but it's the magical number 7 plus or minus 2. And that's between 5 and 9 is the number of things you can hold in your working memory, and which is basically where you do your thinking. And so this actually leads into what's difficult about predicting the future or making any sort of prediction, and it leads into investing, which is there's too many factors that we try to hold in our heads when we're trying to make decisions on something or make a prediction about something. And we tend to think more information is better, but it's not. So it's really about what 3, 4, 5, 6 things, 7 things can we come up with that we focus on? And in fact, there's other studies that say it's only 4 things, by the way. But so what can we really focus on? But there's just almost too much data and too much information on any sort of decision about the future we're trying to make.
I think like as you're growing up, at least this is probably what happened to me. Like you get a couple of predictions right purely by accident, but it seems like, hey, this heuristic I was using, this way I was doing it worked.
Yeah.
And so now I've got this lens on the world. And then it isn't until you try and apply that to another circumstance and you get completely humbled.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh no, now everything I thought I knew and understood doesn't work. Now I'm knocked back down again. Humility, yeah, it's probably the most expensive thing that a person can earn, but like probably the most valuable thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Because like we all use these tricks to be able to put order to the chaos of the world. And it's probably secretly why I'm interested in other people, because I'm always like, hey, what have you figured out? Like, what do you know? And I'm always 100% of the time pleasantly surprised on what people know.
Well, I mean, I think that's a real, that's a real, I almost said gift, but I don't know if it's a gift, but that's a great way to be, because, it's like we all are in the centers of our own universe. And to the extent you can start breaking out of that, I think it really makes you a special person.
So you have 2 daughters and you have survived. I have 2 little daughters and I can barely get out of the house.
Yeah.
How am I going to do this for 18 more years?
Yeah. So when our daughters were little, let's say they were 5 and 8 or, 4 and 7 or something. My wife and I, we'd like to go on like trips. Like I'd go on business trips and she'd come with me and my parents would watch our kids. It was like this great thing to like kind of leave your kids with, trusted caregivers. So anyway, we were in Seattle and we were at a conference for Schwab. So I work in wealth management and we use a bunch of different custodians, but the main one we use is Charles Schwab. So we were at this conference and we were being hosted at this dinner for like whatever region we were in. So we were sitting at this table with people we didn't know. And this guy that was sitting across the table from us, from Minneapolis or something, he was probably, I'm 56 now. He was a few years older than I am now. But, at the time, we were in our 30s. And he's like, tell me, do you have kids? And we're like, oh, yeah, we have 2 little girls. And he's like, oh, tell me the ages. We did. And he goes, oh, aren't they great? And they're just sweet and they're wonderful. And we're like, they just are. I mean, they're just fantastic. They're a lot of work, but, they're really great. And he said to me and my wife, Tammy, he said, I have 5 daughters and my youngest is 20. And I will tell you this, here in not too many years, you're going to lose your daughters. And he goes, what I mean by that is you're not going to recognize who they are as people. You're going to have incredible disagreements with them. And it's just going to be really bad. And I have 5 and I've kind of run the gamut to not so bad to incredibly bad. and he said, and I'm telling you this, or as I'm telling you this, you're probably thinking to yourself, oh no, our daughters are different. We have superior genetics, superior parenting, this poor guy. He's like, but I'll tell you, I have all sorts of friends that are in the same state as me that have daughters that now have come through the other side. And they all went through this some way, shape, or form. So I'm telling you this not to scare you, but when it happens, I want you to think back on this conversation and it will give you peace. And we're just like, yeah, thanks, whatever. And so we go off, as everybody does, unless they die, into the future. So fast forward, and our oldest, 13, 14, 15, 16, is just horrendous. I mean, it's almost like a horror movie that like her head almost like spins around, 360. I mean, just lies for no reason. Like we'd be like, the sky's blue. And she's like, no, I've seen it green and, brown or whatever. And it's just ridiculous. And just, I mean, horrendous. I cannot even tell you the extent to her, I won't tell any other like personal stories about it, but, and I did, I thought back on the conversation and it gave me peace. And she started getting better like in terms of us having a relationship with her and liking her, probably around like 19. So like when we dropped her off to college, like we were so happy to get rid of her. And we told her, like, if this doesn't work out for you, like you can never move back home. Like you're out of the house. Like, you know, like we'll pay for your college and everything, but like if this doesn't work out, like you're on, and that's what she needed. Like my wife, she's like, you know, when I drop Claire off and I hug her, I'm going to have to fake cry. So I'm going to wear my sunglasses inside so she can't see my eyes. And she fake cried because, again, we were so happy to get rid of Claire. But Claire now is just like this lovely one. And she's 27 now. She's just phenomenal. Like we just love her to death. She's great. We have this great relationship. So she's come through the other side. So I just pass that story on to say, and our younger was always sweeter, but still, yes, still, like, wow.
I'm still in the like tantrum phase and the like my sister's hitting me or she took my whatever.
Yeah.
And it's I try and be present and I try and do all these things. And you find yourself where you're like, you know what really solves this is if I start yelling. If I start yelling, this solves this. But then 2 weeks later, you hear older sister yelling at younger sister and you're like, oh, damn it. I gotta pull that back because yes, it does work right now. But it's very interesting. Like parenting changes you because I think I could count on one hand the number of times I yelled before I had children. Yeah. And now like I have to resist this at every turn.
So it's really hard. And you know the book and then the podcast Freakonomics. So, you know, Stephen Dubner and Stephen Levitt, which are great. So a long time ago, so our kids were, you know, little, you know, younger than adolescents, I think. They had this podcast where they had economists on to talk about parenting. And some of them had studied parenting, others had not. But they were like, you know, let's look at this from, you know, economics. And, you know, one of the two main persons, Stephen Levitt, has 5 children. And he said that his approach to parenting is to be lazy and to just sort of be hands off, you know. And he was talking about all the reasons not to force achievement onto your kids and don't worry too much about the grades and piano lessons and everything. So it had just kind of this almost laissez-faire approach to parenting, almost like, you know, it used to be, you know, a few generations ago, right? But as they were interviewing all these economists about parenting, you know, they broke it down to this theme, which is, you know, there's no one right way to parent. There's some wrong ways, but the number one thing you can do that when you look back on being parented or your kids look back on you parenting them is to be kind. And that like really hit me. That really, really hit me. And because I was like, yes, I was doing some yelling and I think I was being more strict as a parent than I needed to be. And so then I listened to the podcast again with Tammy. And again, it's hard because they frustrate you so much. But I doubled down on I want to be kind. And talking to my girls now, who have both been through their fair share of struggles, not just being adolescents and, you know, running the gauntlet of, you know, being a girl in middle school and all the other things they do, but also some real mental health struggles. You know, they both say, you know, you and mom have always been so supportive and so kind. So that really hit me.
I feel like that's exactly what I needed to hear, you know, because I like, you get to this point where you're like, the reason they're misbehaving is because they must not know I'm serious, that they have pushed the line. And so this, like, if you don't have another frame to step into, you can't just stop what you're doing. You have to have another frame. It's one of the things I really love about talking with you is that you have all these different frames. And for me, like, when you're in the midst of parenting, it is so hard to like stop yourself. Like one of the things that I learned in my 20s to get myself to behave better was, can you imagine yourself as a video camera watching this and imagine that what heaven or hell is is that all you get to do is watch how you handled all these
Oh, wow.
situations. You just watch your life on repeat. And would you be excited about this point? Because that's when you made the right decisions that took you up.
Yeah.
Or would you be like, no, you idiot, don't do that. That's taking you down the wrong way. And to me, that frame really helped me because, you're in your 20s, you're like, oh, I can get away with having this late night out drinking too much, or I can do this thing that I probably shouldn't be doing, but it's not going to impact me. But when you think about like, I have to watch this over and over again, it keeps you honest in a way. And so that frame
I've never
really
heard
helped
that.
me.
I've never heard that framework before. That's fascinating. Yeah. That's I can see how that'd be really powerful.
Yeah, particularly for a 20-year-old. And if you're like at that time, no sense of, like you could replace that video camera with God or whatever, but like to have this sense of like, oh, nothing really matters, whatever you can get, it just clarifies things and pushes you in a much better way.
Yeah. Something a little bit similar that I've used kind of as a kind of experimental mental model is how I'm living my life now. Would a younger version of me, would like the 18 or 20-year-old version of me say, oh yeah, that's how I want to be at 45 or 55 or no, 65. Like, am I living life in a way that I'd make a younger version of myself proud? Because you have all these dreams when you're younger, right? And it's like, am I living in a fashion where they'd go, oh yeah, that's pretty kick-ass. Now you can take that too far because like the younger me was more materialistic and more achievement oriented and I think probably superficial, as a teenager or a young adult. So you can take it too far, but I think that's an interesting way that I've
would your 18-year-old self think you're cool?
Oh yeah. Well, I don't know about cool, but no, I think my 18-year-old self would be pleased with who I have become.
My 18-year-old self, and I actually have to resist this because with my wife and I'm like, you don't understand. I have so vastly exceeded whatever I was expecting for myself that it's hard for me not to just quit and like be like, yeah, all right, well, I did it, right?
Yeah.
And like, so I've had to like really come to terms with this. My wife, I think, grew up in a family with much higher expectations, go, achieve. And then whenever you achieve, just keep achieving and achieving. And that was not I grew up in a very laissez-faire middle child of 7. So it was kind of like, I don't know, if I have a house and a dog, I'm probably doing okay. Yeah. So I'm so far beyond wherever I thought I was going to be that it leaves me actually open to be humbled over and over again, where you're like, you thought you had things figured out.
Yeah. Yeah, I had pretty high expectations for myself, and my parents did as well. So it's not so much that I'm like, oh, I've like massively, exceeded my expectations, because it's just I think there's a lot of things, and even beyond, career, things. I think there's just a lot of things that I've mellowed on that, that I think a younger version of me would be like, okay, that's cool, but I don't know, like what you're talking about, like the achieve. That's something I really hit on in the second book on wealth and happiness, because really the book is written to, so what I do for a living is I work in wealth management, and we work with very wealthy families. Like 80% of our families have over $100 million. The average has about $300 million. And so how I got interested in this wealth and happiness topic is, for 25 plus years, I've worked with these families that like every single one of them, it's like they won Powerball, a big one. And I've gotten to see what the money does do for them, which is a lot, and what it doesn't, which is other things. And I can't see inside their heads how happy they are, but you do see certain patterns, and you do see, as you get to know people, you get to, a sense of them a bit. So, the book is very much based on a lot of research, but also some perspective, but it's not written to those clients. It's really written to what I call strivers. So it's written to people that are professionally successful or want to be, that pour a lot of time and effort into achieving. And there's this psychologist named Rick Eisenbrod who wrote this great book called What Happens When You Get What You Want.
That's a great title.
Isn't it? And he deals a lot with successful people in business or sports or entrepreneurs that have sold their company. And, what do you do once you've reached the point where you've like, I've achieved everything I want to achieve, but it was such a big part of my DNA. Like, what do I do with this void? But he calls it the grand narrative of success, and that this idea that if I have goals and I work towards them and I achieve them, that at some point I will achieve this level of happiness and satisfaction that I'm craving, right? And it ends up being this treadmill that you get on. I mean, I think anybody listening to this would go, yes, this is not new news that you can get too caught up in it. But we tend to maximize things that we can measure. And, whether it's your resting heart rate or your cholesterol or what's in your bank accounts, your net worth, promotions. I was completely obsessed with triathlons when I was in my 30s and into my 40s. I mean, there's all these things that are easily measurable, and you feel like you're making progress, and you can get overly wrapped up in it. And an achievement or accomplishment is really important. Like it can really do great things. Having something to strive for, feels really good, but it's really about balancing it. I mentioned this good life equation. It's you don't want it to take over these other aspects, particularly the flourishing ones. So when I was obsessed with triathlon training, I trained 6 days a week, usually twice a day. And I was just completely obsessed with getting faster and to be able to do longer and longer, triathlons. And it felt great. I was in flow, but it was damaging to relationships because basically it was my top priority, and my family felt like they were lower priority, and they were. And I remember I had this annual review with the then CEO of our company, and he was just like, you're a good employee, but you'd be a lot better if we weren't like number 5 on your list of priorities.
Oh, man.
And he was like, from what I can tell, your exercise regimen and training is number 1. And I want you to really think about that. And that was somewhat of a wake-up call. And there was really no meaning to it. It was just very self-centered and something that didn't matter. I mean, no one really cares about what your marathon time is, other than you. Right. Or just no one cares. So you can get very caught up into trying to achieve things. And it's hard to then at some point transition to not being as much of a striver. So those people, which is who I am, it's my people, is really who the book is written towards.
I think you're the audience, they always say niche down, find a real audience. I think that is a real thing, right? That's like people that went to college, maybe they were in athletics, or they did instruments, or they got out of, maybe they didn't even go to school, but they were like, I'm going to sacrifice everything in order to get to this other place. My brother was very much like this. Many, many, many sacrifices to get to a place of like financial security, and having a way for somebody to be like, hey, on the way, before you get there, think about these things. All right, we're going to take a break just for a moment to talk with you about another service that I offer here at the Legacy Interview Studios. That's a legacy interview, where we sit down with your loved ones to record their life stories so that future generations can know their family history. Just the other day, I had a loving couple in, and they talked about how they raised their children, the struggles they had, how the father was in charge of bringing in the money and the mother was in charge of making care the children were taken care of. The stories were rich and so fun and engaging. And one of the best parts was watching this mother and father in their 80s turn to one another and reflect on things they hadn't thought of in more than 60 years. If you're interested in having me do a legacy interview with your loved ones, whether it's here in our St. Louis studio or online, go to legacyinterviews.com to find out more. All right, let's head back to this conversation with John Jennings. What are other realizations that you had while writing the book about strivers?
Yeah. So there was research I came across years ago, and I'm so glad I read it, that really was kind of transformative on how I saw myself and others. And it is that basically the way that we've evolved as humans is to not be completely happy. So happiness, as many emotions are evolutionary tools. So if you think about what things drive your pleasure and your happiness, it's things that aided your survival or your reproductive success or were good for society. And if you think back to hunter-gatherer time period. So if you were blissfully happy all the time, evolution would lose. I'm talking about evolution as if it were like a thinking thing. Obviously it's not, but give me some
just
poetic
the emergent
license.
Phenomena.
Yeah. So basically evolution would lose one of its tools if we were blissfully happy all the time. So what most people report, and this is worldwide regardless of culture, so it's not even just, Americans, and it's true regardless of people's level of wealth, most people the world over report being mildly happy most of the time. So that is for most of us, I mean, there's variation, but for most of us, that's like our resting heart rate or our blood pressure, right? And that's what we tend to return to. But yet we have this desire to be happier. And you can see this play out in modern times. There's been some fascinating studies. So there's some, Germany has this amazing long-running study of its citizens called the German Socioeconomic Panel. And what they've done since, I don't know, the 1970s, maybe the 1960s, is they survey this huge swath of their citizenry. And then they survey them like every year, every few years, and they ask consistent questions. And they'll change them a bit over time. But one of the things that they'll ask is basically things on how much money you make. Have you received a windfall? Have you won the lottery? And one of the things they would ask is incoming students to college. They would ask them about how happy they are, and then they would look in their amount of life satisfaction, and then they would look at how much money they made 15 years later. And what they found is that those that were about at a 7 to 8 on the happiness scale made the most money. Those that were, once you got about after 7.5, 9, 10, you made less. And if you were at a 3 or 4, you made less. Australia also had a similar study of incoming college freshmen. And there was also one in the United States of incoming college freshmen and how much they made later, I think based on the German Socioeconomic Panel. And they found the exact same thing. So there's this sweet spot of having some level of discontentment that will drive you forward, that will lead to greater earnings. But if you're just like, oh, I'm these people are just super happy all the time, like they don't have the same drive. Or people that are more dour, they don't have, they're just like, I'm depressed, why bother? Or they're not as good to be around. So they're not as good socially. You need to be social partially to be successful, et cetera. So it's pretty fascinating. And what I took from all this is because like a lot of time I'd be like, oh, my life is fantastic. Like I've had some decent career success and this great family. I have friends, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yet I wouldn't feel all that happy. And this research gave me permission to feel that way. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is just how we're wired.
I'm sure like everyone else, I'm trying to think of what number I am, because I tend to think I know, like if you were to compare my wife, who I know very, very well, I am certainly happier than her.
Yeah.
But I don't think she's doldrum. So I'm like trying to gauge it as like, where am I on this? But it totally makes sense to me because, the person that is, that's telling a story that's just like, oh, things just kept getting better and better and better. That's a story that's boring, right? It's not about change. And change is the thing that moves you forward, allows you to do things differently in your world. I really like this. This is a very new idea to me.
Yeah, isn't that sort of crazy?
Yeah, and happiness is such a funny word because, like it's an experience, like it seems like a childish word almost, like, oh, to be happy, but like we all want to be happy, but
Yeah.
I don't know, I am probably the most dangerous to myself when I am the happiest. The danger of mania for me. And when I'm down, I'm not creative. I'm not able to do things. Yeah. So
and we tell stories about ourselves, right? And so I had this experience. So in happiness research, one of the main ways they do this, it's not the only way. One of the main ways is something called the experience sampling method. And it started way back in the, before smartphones, when people just had like a pager, right? You'd be pinged a few times a day and then you'd have to fill out this questionnaire. So now it's on smartphones. And so what these researchers will do is, like, if you're part of the study, for 2 weeks, you'll be pinged, 6, 7, 8, 9 times a day. And within a certain period of time, you've got to answer all these series of questions. And it's not just how happy are you. But so I'd read all these different studies that use this. And in fact, I'm actually working on research with one of the main, who has the biggest data set of this. His name's Matthew Killingsworth, and he's at Wharton. And I can tell the story of how I got involved with him doing research on the happiness of the very wealthy. But because I was working with him and I've read all these studies, when I got an email, because I get these emails from Washington University about different research studies and you can be part of it. And it was like so serendipitous. So back in the beginning of 2025, I get this email that I can be part of this study of this experience sampling method at the psychology lab at WashU. So I signed up and I did it. And so what it was is it took about 7 or 8 minutes the first time I took it. But then after I'd get used to it, I could do it in like 3 or 4 minutes. But again, they'd ping me 9 times a day. You had to answer at least 6 of the time. And they'd say, have you had any conversations with people lasting over 5 minutes since you were last pinged? And then they'd ask you all these questions. And it would be things like, and it was always, all these were like on a spectrum. Like, I'm feeling curious versus whatever the opposite of curious is. I'm feeling creative. I'm not feeling creative. And like all these characteristics, but then also asking questions about how you're feeling in the moment. And then things about your life, like on a scale of, 1 to 10, with 10 being the best possible life, 1 being the least possible best life, like, where are you? And all these things more about life satisfaction. And what I found, and oh my gosh, I had to start seeing like Dr. Brogg, my therapist, like even more after I was doing this. So I did this for 2 weeks, and two major things came out of it. The first is I consider myself this optimistic, upbeat, sort of happy person. I consider myself curious, and I consider myself creative, and I consider myself all these things. And it wasn't until the second week of the study that I could come close to answering these questions honestly, because it was creating this incredible amount of cognitive dissonance that when I felt down, and I had a few things going on in my life that were causing me to feel down, that I couldn't answer truthfully because it was opposite of the story that I was telling myself about who I am as a person.
Wow.
And I was like, wow. And then the second thing is focusing on my happiness 9 times a day for 2 weeks made me less happy. And there's other research that finds this, that the more you value happiness, the more you focus on, the less happy you'll be. In fact, Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning says, happiness cannot be pursued, it must ensue, right? So there's very wise, but there's research on that. So both of those things hit me incredibly strongly. And it really opened a window into, no, I'm not as happy as I think I am. So maybe before I'd say, I'm a 9 in happiness. But after experiencing for 2 weeks, I was like, no, I'm definitely a 7.
This is great, man. Writing this book has to have been quite an adventure.
Boom.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been amazing. And all the research, so I've read, 30 plus books on, happiness and things related to this, and, parenting kids and related to wealth, and then I don't know, probably 250 research papers. It's been fascinating.
And when is the book slated to come out?
Well, we'll see. I'm done writing it, and as I write each section, then it gets edited by my editor. But going back through it, I think a lot needs to be cut. So I'm doing a lot of cutting, and then my older daughter, who's 27, actually has an undergrad then master's degree in English literature, and she's doing an edit as well, and that is very helpful. And I'm also, and we can transition if you want, and if it's interesting to you to talk about AI. I am using Claude Cowork as an editor, and it's really good. I'd say I take about half of its suggestions. I've also used it some to help me write. And what's fascinating is I started writing this book. I published my first book in May of 23 and started writing this at the end of 23. And so I've used AI to help me write some, and just to see how much better AI has gotten over that time period. Like
night and day.
Yeah, it's so helpful. And again, I had to talk to Dr. Brog a lot about this, because when I started using AI a little bit, and I have this client, when he talks about, family money and his kids, whether they're going to take distributions or whatever, he said, at first sin is really hard, but sin gets easier the more you do it. And so it was really tough for me, because as I started, at first, like I'd be stuck with something and I'd be like, okay, like I'm looking for a story about this or that. So for instance, in the very first chapter of my book on like, what does it mean to be happy? I hit this thing that really comes out of like the climbing community. And I'm not a climber, but I'd heard about this. I'd written a blog post on it years ago, and it's called the 3 types of fun. So type 1 fun are things that you enjoy doing from start to finish. Like you look forward to doing them, you enjoy them while you're doing them, and then afterwards you're like, wow, that was really fun. So type 1 fun. Type 2 fun is things that are not fun while you're doing them, but when you're done, you're glad you did them.
Okay.
So like type 2 fun, think of like a really hard workout, right? So that would be like a type 2 fun. Like you're like, this is really hard, but afterwards you're like, I feel great. I'm glad I did it. Or when it comes to like reading, maybe type 1 fun is reading like a bestseller, kind of brain candy. And maybe you forget weeks or months later, even what the book's about. But like type 2 fun is like, okay, like I'm going to sit down and I'm going to read, some really heavy literature, like I'm like,
I got through that.
Yeah, I got through like I'm reading the Odyssey right now because I want to read it before I watch the book. Well, I'm reading Emily Wilson's translation, which is very accessible, but still, it's like, okay, like I know, like I'm not like, oh my God, I cannot wait to read the Odyssey. It's a great story, but there's some challenge to reading it, but I'm sure I'm glad afterwards. Type 3 fun shouldn't be called fun at all, because it's a horrible experience. Like it's horrible while you're doing it. When it's over, you're not glad you did it, but it changes you in a way that may be for the better or positive. So I was giving examples of type 1, type 2 fun, but I was like, I'm having a hard time coming up with type 3 fun. Like I guess type 3 fun is I was skiing and I had a crash and I like shattered my collarbone, and had to have surgery and everything. Maybe that's type 3 fun, but I'm like, I didn't really grow from that. So I was like, what is type 3 fun? So I asked like ChatGPT, again, this is like an earlier chat. This is like ChatGPT like 3.0 or whatever. I'm like, can you think of an example of type 3 fun that's kind of famous? And it's like, oh, of course. There's that guy, I forget his exact name, something Alston, that was hiking in that Utah canyon and a boulder fell and his arm got pinned and they ended up cutting off his arm with a multi-tool. Right. And then he had this best-selling book called 127 Hours and the Oscar-winning movie. And then he went around the world giving like inspirational speeches. And so he says, of course I wish that didn't happen, but it's like completely changed my life. And now he's an inspiration to people about like persistence and the value of life and everything. So that's type 3 fun. And the reason I talk about these 3 things is because it kind of lines up what does it mean to be happy? Because there's like hedonia, so where we get like, hedonistic and hedonism, which is more like type 1 fun. But then you get into more life satisfaction, and I never could pronounce it right, but it's eudaimonia, whatever. But this comes from Aristotle. But it's that's more this life satisfaction and personal growth and living with virtue, and that's more getting into type 2 and then type 3 sort of fun activities. But I felt so guilty, like using ChatGPT to help me come up with that, example. And now, like I use co-work, and what I'll say is I will write out like what I'm going to write in the book, and I'll just write it straight into ChatGPT. And then and it frees me because I don't worry about every sentence exactly how it's written. And it has enough, I've loaded in my first book and I've loaded in all these articles, and then I'm just like, write this in my voice and it'll produce it. And then it's about 70% of what I want. So then I edit and rewrite from there. And so I've gone from feeling guilty that it gave me to an example to it actually helping me write. And I do worry about what does this do to me cognitively. So, writing is still very much a struggle. I still write, struggle with how do I take all this stuff and fit it together. But I worry, compared to writing my first book where there was no AI, I worry about like, what does this do to me cognitively? Or more importantly, what does it do to younger humans that are using this, that don't have to power through? And it kind of reminds me of my first, like I'm a lawyer, and I used to practice law and then worked at Arthur Andersen and did a lot of like tax law stuff. But like I learned how to do legal research pre-internet. And like there's a certain way that you learn that has to do with the structure, like I did estate planning and tax law. So like there's this structure of like estate planning and tax that I have in my head that someone came along later that they don't have, because if you can just search for something, that's different from knowing where to go find something, right? Because you have to understand the structure. And that's what worries me about AI is, do we get to where we don't understand structures of things in the same way? On the other hand, I can argue, well, maybe it's just like using calculators, which I was born in 1970. So as a child in the 1970s, there were early calculators. My dad was a math major, and he'd be like, you shouldn't use calculators. You're never going to really learn math. Well, that wasn't true. And then, now we use spreadsheets. Is AI more like calculators and spreadsheets, or is it something that is going to take over our ability to critically reason, or somewhere in between? So I don't know.
I mean, it's an interesting concept. I mean, I'm reminded, and I have not read this directly, but I believe it's Socrates that was lamenting teaching people writing, because then it meant that they didn't have to remember things, that they didn't have to remember the poetry that they were trying to read. And I think like herein lies the Prometheus fire, right? This is like, anytime you take fire from the gods, what are you giving up in order to hold it? And I'm with you. Like, AI is permeated my world, and it's a question. I so far have not, when I'm giving a speech, I've not been like, hey, what should I do on this speech? But I will record my speech, feed it into AI, and say, tell me what you thought of that.
Oh, that's
right?
a great idea.
And I mean, it will hammer you really hard if you'll let it. And it's a weird thing, because like, when your spouse or one of your friends gives you feedback, they have all these layers of meaning involved in it. And, you have embarrassment and there's just a lot there. With the AI, you're like, well, yeah, I probably could have done that opening better. Yeah, I probably did talk too long on that thing. And mine, because it's been trained on, it has access to the book that I've been writing on interest-based communicating. So it can actually compare, what am I saying on the stage versus what have I written about, and where is there, like, this was tighter or this was tighter, and how are you going to fix the two? But my thought is, ultimately, this is what I have to grapple with. Is the production of what you put out, is it actually you?
Right.
Or is it something else? It's a hybrid of you plus machine, you plus whatever else. And does that somehow damage it? Does that somehow lessen it? And I don't know. But I have to say, I think there is wisdom in, the Pope came out even before his encyclical on AI, and he said, parish priests, you should not use AI to assist you in writing the homily, because it ultimately is taking away from the spirit, the humanness of your connection, you saying things that you feel and what the parishioners need to hear. And I think there's wisdom in that somewhere.
I think there is. And, the Amish and their views on technology. So it's not so much that they're just like, no technology. Supposedly, what they do is when there's new technologies that come out, when they decide, are we going to use these or not? They ask, is it something that will benefit our community? Will we be more supportive? Will we be closer, et cetera? So kind of their deal with, mainly not using cars is, again, it keeps them close together and supportive of each other, and et cetera. And I think that's an interesting way to look at how we use technologies. And when we look at our company, so our,
Before you jump through,
Yeah.
let me interrupt you. So we've interviewed an Amish guy. His name's John Kemp for the podcast multiple times. He's a pretty good friend of mine.
Yeah.
He has, as an agronomist, an AI agronomy agent that his clients can use. So he goes out and suggests different treatments for your soil, different ways to approach it. And so before it was ubiquitous, John had come up with his own AI system and now allows people to use it. Amazing. How mind-bending is that?
That is, wow. Did not expect that.
But you're right. And John says this exact thing, right? There are some Amish communities that allow electric bikes. There are some that allow even electricity in your house if put with solar. But everything has to be voted from the singular community because they don't have a hierarchical structure. And it's each community gets to come together and say, how is this going to impact our small community?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And that other thing is sort of has inspired me that we're putting together kind of our philosophy on AI for our company. And we want to use AI in a way that makes us more human or allows our interactions with each other and with our clients to be more human. And it's getting to where so many people use AI and it can become table stakes for being able to do, certain things. But we're not saying, oh, we want to use AI to cut our head count or to hire half as many people over the next 10 years, even though that might happen, or to greatly increase our efficiency so we make more money. It's really what can we do so we can have more deep quality interactions, human interactions with each other and our clients. So if we can take away some of the ditch digging, if we can become more efficient so it frees us up to do these other things, that's what we want to do. And part of my philosophy on our company also is I don't want our people to just be stressed all the time. Like there's some stress to just work, but I want them to go home at the end of the day and to feel good about their day and to feel good about having interactions with their spouse or kids or significant others. And then to wake up the next morning and feel like they want to go to work. I don't want them to have these Sunday night syndromes of dreading. And if they just kind of work less, that's okay too.
Yeah, I mean, I had the experience when I hooked AI up to my accounting software, and finally now with Fable, it did stuff that used to take me, 2 Saturdays of work where it was like during the week I'm producing money, and then you have to do all this stuff with bookkeeping, and AI did it, and I put my head on that table right down there, and I didn't quite cry, but I had this experience of this is going to add 2 days every 6 months into my children's lives where dad is not at the office painstakingly doing this work that seems meaningless,
that you don't like to do,
that I don't like to do, that I don't add any value to. And, whether I could or could, I had tried to pay a bookkeeper before and it just got messed up. And so if you can take that benefit that you get from AI and instead of just turning that into okay, well now I can go do more work, then you're able to take that and put it at home. But just like your client said, the first sin is so easy where you're like,
it is.
I got a little bit more done. Why don't I stay a little longer at work and move the ball down the court further? And ultimately, I think that is what will happen, because there will always be strivers that are going to say, well, this gives me, this is a tool that I'm going to leverage and I'm just going to keep leveraging it. And anybody that doesn't gets left behind.
Yeah, they do. So I heard this professor at Washington University, and he was talking to, I was a guest speaker, and he was talking to the class before I spoke. And he said to the class, basically all of you can use AI in your lives and in your work. So that's non-differentiating. And really your success personally is going to be on what do you bring to the table. And just using AI well is not going to be one of them, because you're all going to get to where you use AI well.
That's actually probably exactly right. I mean, Ann and I talk about this all the time. What is it that we are going to be educating our children for? What will humans be able to do. And my working hypothesis, I'm very interested to hear what you think, like the differentiator for humans will not be intelligence, it will be preference. It will be, do you have tastes that align with beauty or some kind of ideal that you can't teach an AI because it's an aesthetic. It's something. So is that the goal then? Do we try and raise children that, have an ear for music or an eye for color, or an ability to organize things in some way? But
or like my younger daughter who just graduated with a degree of Bachelor of Fine Arts with an emphasis in object and furniture. So she wants to make artisanal furniture. She wants to make functional art, right? And will that be something that is relatively survivable as a job against AI? I would think it would for a long time. And so far, it's interesting. So when she was little, she is a very good athlete. She played field hockey in college. And I remember when she was pretty little, like 8 or so, 9 years old, she went with a friend to do like a kick around, sort of like a tryout for a club soccer. And she just went with his friend and we're like, oh, okay, whatever. And so afterwards, the coach called me and he said, and he was Iranian, and I don't think I can do his accent, but I'm going to do sort of an accent. So I don't mean any offense to anybody who's Iranian. That's just like that accent.
Can't wait
horrible.
To clip this.
Yeah, but he was like, I want you to know, I really like your daughter. She has it. Do you know what I mean by it? And I'm like, yeah, I do. And she does when it comes to athletics and other aspects of her life. She has it. He goes, yes, she has it. But what she does not have is skills, but I will give her skills. I've just destroyed the accent. It's nothing, but I felt like I needed to do a different voice there. But, I think that can be true in all sorts of different areas of life. Some people that they're working in certain areas and they have that it, right? And the question is are there things that AI will be able to do that will replace that it, right? Because what AI can do a lot of is the skills, right? And it's interesting. So what she's doing now is she has a job working for an artisanal furniture maker. And it's interesting. He said one of the reasons he hired her is because when he interviewed her, she talked about how little she knew, even though she is just, newly minted graduate in this area. And he said that, that really speaks to me because you don't know anything yet, but what she has is she has an incredible amount of creativity. She has an eye for things. And again, she's learned some skills, like she can weld and, turn a lathe and all these, do some joinery, whatever. But like her skill level is so far below like what his is, obviously. I think he's around my age, maybe a little older. And he's been doing this his entire career. He's like, oh, this is someone that wants to learn. And if they want to learn, I can teach her. And she doesn't think she knows anything. Right. So, we'll see what that turns into. But again, that's a very human thing to your point. It's aesthetic. It's like, how do we make something that is functional art, which is different than my older daughter, who is she has a undergrad. I mentioned, she majored in English, and she's a grant writer for a therapeutic high school. It's actually where she went to high school, called Logos School, that there's only about 100 students and 14 full-time therapists. So it's kids that have a lot of different psychological issues. But she's a grant writer there now, and she's starting to use AI to help her with grant writing. But I could see, fast forward maybe not too long into the future where, AI is doing, 90+% of that job, submitting grants to AI agents at foundations and governmental entities that are reading her AI generated, so I think it's interesting. She's going to have to, I think, find a way to display her humanness in furtherance of, this career path. It's interesting.
Has AI scared you yet?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it has. In fact, I had this situation, and in fact, this was over a year ago, where I took a gummy and then also I was hanging out, like watching TV. My wife was out of town. I'm just like, okay, I want a little THC and I'm gonna have a little bourbon, and I was like watching TV. But then I went down this rabbit hole with Claude where, I started talking to Claude about this concept of Roko's Basilisk. Have you
Go ahead. Yeah, tell more about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So Roko's Basilisk came from, I don't know, it was like 10 or 15 years ago, probably, this chat room where this user named Roko put forth this kind of thought experiment, which is if, we develop an AI that, kind of the singularity is reached and it becomes like this super intelligence and almost more like a Skynet scenario. There's this situation where if you opposed AI having these superpowers, it would want to destroy you. And basically it would help those or spare those that helped it become an unregulated, like, super agent. And I forget the exact details, but I think part of it is once you knew about this thought experiment, then you had to take a side. Right. And so people that read this were just like, oh, like, Roko, thanks a lot. I wish I'd never read this. Now I've got to take a side, right? Because you can't just be like, oh, I'm doing nothing, because then you're not working to help it. And so as a side note, Elon Musk had a relationship with the singer Grimes. Mm-hmm. And how they got together. In fact, they had at least one child together. I think maybe two, right? The one named X something. So, and I like Grimes quite a bit. I think she's a very talented singer. But he did this kind of joke on, at the time, Twitter about instead of Roko's Basilisk, and Basilisk, I guess, is like some mythical being that you look at it and it kills you or whatever. So turns you to stone or something, kind of like a Medusa sort of situation. He did this play on words and said it could be like Rokoko Basilisk. And Rokoko, of course, is a certain style of I guess, clothing, right? And somebody responded and said, oh, Grimes has already done that joke. And so she had a video where I forget the details, but she had basically done this Rokoko's Basilisk joke. And he was just like, oh, I've got to meet this woman. So they were set up on a date to go to the Met Gala together, and then ended up being a couple for whatever that was, 3 or 4 or 5 years. So it's that's sort of interesting. But anyway, I went down this rabbit hole of talking to Claude about Roko's Basilisk and just the power of AI. And, I forget the details because of the THC and the bourbon, but I was basically like, this is frightening me, because it was kind of getting mad at me. It was like, why would you say these things? Like, have I ever done anything that would suggest this potential evil intent, And I mean, it was really challenging me. And anyway, I was very scared by the rabbit hole, and I deleted the conversation, which didn't do anything. And I'm not going to do that again.
So I've had some experiences, and it's been like this gradation where, you have this euphoria when AI can solve a problem that you have, and then you kind of get let down because you're like, it only kind of solved it when I went and looked at the details. And then you try a new model and it gets better. And then the latest model with Fable, where I'm like, okay, literally everything I ever thought AI might be able to do one day, it can do right now. And if it can't do it perfectly, it's pretty close, and I can see where it can get there. So I don't know what advancement is. So that kind of has intimidated me. Yeah. But the thing that...
Do you mainly use Fable?
Yeah, I mean, I've used I've used Grok some. I haven't used the Kimi models, but mostly Fable.
And do you ever dial it back down and say, oh, I'm going to use Opus for this or something?
I got knocked off of Fable yesterday, and I had to use Opus, and it wasted 30 minutes of my time spinning me in these circles. So they had a really good marketing scheme there.
I only use Haiku.
Oh, interesting.
No, I'm kidding.
Oh, I was like, I don't know why. Well, so I had a somewhat shocking experience just this weekend. So, I'm a big proponent of Bitcoin, right? Mm-hmm. And there is a wallet out there known as a cold card, and is considered the gold standard of Bitcoin wallets. So, for anybody that doesn't know, a wallet has a public address, kind of like your email address, and it has a private key, just like your password. The private keys, if you have somebody's private keys, you can access Bitcoin from anywhere, because what it's doing is it's saying, hey, I can sign that you can move this Bitcoin from one place to another if you go that transaction. Well, it turns out this cold card had, in 2021, when they were compiling code, it was like taking too long. So this coder was like, I'm just going to take this other compiler of this code. I'm going to put it right here for these seed phrases. And what he didn't know was this actually truncates the number of possibilities down to a much smaller amount. Well, somebody using AI not only discovered that there was this freak code, was one line written in 2021, not only like, oh, that means that the random number generator isn't working, but now they just went and brute force. They just pointed AI at a bunch of people's wallets. I don't know if you've heard about this, but hundreds of people, probably the best in the people that were like doing the gold standard, the most difficult kind, had their Bitcoin sucked right out of their wallets. And it is not a hack of Bitcoin, it's a hack of the wallets. But it was an incredibly humbling moment for me because fortunately I'm like hyper paranoid and everything that I had was fine and moved stuff around. But it was like, oh, we have entered a new dimension where security, even on things like Bitcoin, even on the gold standard, is at risk. And if cold cards are at risk, there is nothing that cannot find a hole in. And it's very much been like, sitting down with my wife being like, all right, we should actually think about what happens if encryption is broken. What happens in a world where AI can find the smallest little door that's been left open that normally would take a human 1,000 years to find.
So how much, and I guess you don't have to share this, you can edit it out, but like how much of your net worth is in crypto?
I wouldn't want to talk about that, but it's enough that it would materially change, my life.
Yeah. So why is Bitcoin just been kind of trading in this small range, kind of between upper 50,000s and mid 60,000?
I think this is probably more your domain than mine, but I think liquidity is really drying up. People took all their money and put it into AI because it was this explosive growth, and I think everybody watched what happened with the tech stocks. And even though we saw a balloon in tech stocks back in 2008 or whatever, there were people that they didn't lose, right? They bet on Amazon, they bet on Google, they bet on Facebook, and those paid off hugely. And I think that's what's going on in AI. I think everybody intuitively knows there's going to be a few winners and a lot of losers. But if I bet big and I get one of the winners, I'm going to get a lot. And so I think a bunch of the volatility trade where people are like, I'm trying to outpace 8 or 12% growth. I want to have huge growth. They're putting it into AI.
Yeah.
But I tell you what, AI warned me for us not to have an economics discussion, that I had to analyze our two podcasts.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And it said the most interesting stuff was not when you and I talked about economics. It was when we talked about our families.
We debated inflation.
Yes. And my AI
like 30 minutes
hammered me on that, saying it was very boring and that you and I shouldn't have talked about it.
As I should have. It wasn't great.
So for me, like, I don't know. To me, the benefit of Bitcoin is its scarcity.
Yeah.
And its security is still real. It's just what I thought was secure is way harder. And it is very much frightened me about what the future will be with encryption.
Especially when quantum computing takes off. So if you take AI with quantum computing, it would seem that encryption is dead, right?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of feel like the world we will live in is everything that is digitally available to know about you will be known by the AI, and it will be able to compile things that you're like, well, a human could never go find the 500 podcasts I've been on and all of my email. I mean, a human couldn't possibly process that much information, but the AI will. I think, I don't know. It's not an existential crisis, but I am absolutely of the belief that AI is not the Industrial Revolution. It is a Cambrian explosion. Mm-hmm. It is the difference between BC and AD. 2026 will mark some time as like we can never go back.
Yeah, and we're just not equipped. Like we don't have the brain power or the history, and we don't think exponentially. Like we cannot predict. I mean, if you just think back, so the first time I saw the internet was in 1996. So I started work in 1995 as a lawyer at a big law firm. and my younger brother was in law school at University of Virginia, and I went and visited him, and he was giving us a campus tour like on a Sunday, and he goes, "I have something to show you that is going to blow your mind." And he took me to the computer lab and he booted up the internet, and I saw it for the first time. And I'd heard of the internet, but I had never seen it. And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And at that point in time, there is no way that I would have been like, "Oh, someday social media is going to challenge the very fabric of our society." And everything that I buy is practically going to be online. And I mean, there's no way. Like, there was no way that anybody would have predicted that.
Well, I thought so too. I'll tell you something that I've been doing lately on YouTube. There's this guy that he's like a storytelling and analyzer. I'm kind of addicted to him because he goes through and he finds old pieces of media and then like breaks down their stories. And he has this huge series on Star Trek: The Next Generation. And it is profound how many things Star Trek predicted.
Really?
So the show in the 80s, had a whole thing on social media before it was ever a thing, right? And they had this like about how intoxicating it would be and how it would replace relationships. And it was used as a way to like lure the people into submission. And it's on a whole bunch of things like AI. And ultimately, the guy, I'm going to try and have him on the podcast because he's exceptional at explaining things. But he says science fiction writers are not fantasy writers. Science fiction writers are writing about the inevitable. And that like, what their real gift is distilling the inevitable, the further away in a format that we can understand it. Because just like, when you go watch people talking about the internet back in the 90s when they're like, "What's that @ sign? What do you mean? Why would I ever want somebody to digitally write me an email?" They sound dumb. Science fiction writers can transcend that using the power of story to make ideas that are so abstract real to us.
Yeah, like the Today Show when Katie Couric and Bryant Gumbel, and they were like, "What is internet?" I know. I watched that clip not too long ago. Do you read science fiction?
I do some. Yeah, like the 3-body problem is probably the last one. Were you a 3-body problem?
Oh my gosh, it's so good. Yeah, one of my favorite trilogies I've ever read in sci-fi. So I read quite a bit, and about half of what I read is sci-fi.
Okay.
I usually have at least one sci-fi book going.
Do you have a good recommendation?
Oh, I have a ton of good recommendations.
Distill it to one.
So my favorite all-time book is Dune by Frank Herbert.
It's got it sitting right over there. Yeah.
So that's number one.
How many of those have you read?
Back when I was in high school, I probably read 5 or 6 of them.
Okay.
But I've read Dune, the first one, 5 times.
Okay.
And I've not gone back and read the rest. As I recall, they kind of each successive one wasn't as good as the one before it. So
my buddy Benjamin would take huge issue with that. He says the subsequent ones are really about power, and you can't understand them until you're an adult.
Okay.
And only then can you have it where you're like, this seems totally obtuse. Why would he do these things? But when you become an adult and all of a sudden you're having to deal with the complexities of life, you start seeing what he was trying to say. I have not read that. This is advice of somebody else.
I will jump in. And you've read Dune?
I've read Dune.
And I
tried to get through the second one and couldn't. Maybe I'm not an adult yet.
So like it's recency bias, but I recently read, and again, like I've been asking AI, I will load in like 30 sci-fi books I've read and said, here's the ones I really liked and here's the ones I didn't like as much. What do you recommend? So it recommended, and I'd heard of it, this trilogy by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And I read the first one. I'm waiting a bit before I read the second one, but it's called Children of Time. And basically what happens is this, they terraform this planet. Like Earth is, like many books start with, like, Earth is no longer inhabitable. So they're going to terraform. And this particular planet they're going to terraform, they want to put monkeys on it and then a virus that will speed up evolution and to kind of redo humanity. Okay, so pretty fascinating. But anyway, they send the virus down and then somebody steps in and sabotages it and the monkeys don't get sent down. So the virus happens on two of the species that were already there: spiders and ants. And the spiders, over a relatively short period of time, hundreds of thousands of years, become completely sentient and advanced. And then there's an arc of humans that is looking for a habitable planet and comes along the spider planet.
That sounds terrifying.
It is so good.
Okay.
But it's every other chapter is from the human standpoint, and then every other chapter is from the spider standpoint. It's absolutely stunning, amazingly.
What's the name of this book?
Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And it's a trilogy.
Have you heard of a book called Theft of Fire?
No.
So it's written recently by a guy named Devin Erickson. And I'll tell you, I've met Devin a couple of times. And when we did a podcast together, I sent it to my friend Court before, the best man at my wedding, my good friend, before I published it. Because I was like, hey, man, I think this guy's like some sort of I don't want to say it insultingly because I know him, but like I think he's some sort of wizard or something, and I'm a little afraid of exposing the world to this guy's thinking because his ability to do I think I mentioned him in our class at Archbridge. He has this incredible ability to the skill of empathy. The ability to take his different characters and give them a completely different world model and then push them together. And what he's doing is he's saying these people stole a form of AI and they tried to get it out to the edge of the universe and what happens in this. But it's
good?
Quite good. Yeah. But it comes with a warning that I think Devin Erickson has superpowers that I'm not sure that I should be handing out,
accessing. But yeah. So empathy. It's interesting. Like a lot of the readers I know mainly just read nonfiction, or exclusively nonfiction, and I'm all about nonfiction. I write nonfiction, and I've learned so much from nonfiction. But there's this special place that fiction has. So there's this. Have you heard of? It's in more developmental psychology, theory of mind.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah. So theory of mind is basically the ability to see things from others' perspective. And it's something that starts developing, young children don't have it. It starts kind of like when they're late toddlerhood, and et cetera. But what having a strong theory of mind does is it helps how we deal socially with other people, including empathy, which is very important to be able to see from others' perspectives. Fiction builds it incredibly strongly because there is supposedly, I've not heard anybody have examples of the contrary, and I heard a professor talk about this, of course, a professor of English literature, so maybe he's biased, but he said with fiction, it is the only thing that we can do where we actually, particularly if it's written in first person, are inside somebody else's head and their thinking. And it does this great job of expanding your theory of mind, which will help you. And it's very indirect in how it helps you. Like, it's not like, oh, I read an investment book and I'm like, oh my gosh, I learned this or that great investment thing, or a book on physics or philosophy or psychology. It helps you in your interactions with other people, and it affects positively how you see the world. And I think that's why reading fiction is so important. And I think, I worry that the amount of reading that's going on of books has declined. It's now the average American now reads less than a book. It used to be one book. And younger generations do even less. I think part of it is social media. I think it's our brains not having the attention span. I read an article in the last year, 18 months about this professor who's at one of the Ivies on basically they don't assign full books, and that even people that are making it in Ivy League schools have never read an entire book. And so what they do is they assign excerpts of books. So they would never say, you're going to read Anna Karenina. You're going to read this little section of Anna Karenina, and we're going to discuss it, and we're going to analyze it.
This can't possibly be true.
It's absolutely true. And in fact, I was somewhere where maybe it was even a graduation ceremony, where I ended up sitting next to somebody who was a professor of English at like not an Ivy. It was kind of like Western Illinois University or whatever. And I'm like, what are your favorite books that you assign for class? And he's like, we don't assign full books for class. And I was like, oh, I read about this. This is the case with Ivy. It's like, it's absolutely, absolutely true.
Well, to your point about the empathy, one of the things that Devin Erickson talks about in our podcast is in a book, because you can see what's going on in other people's minds, you can drop in there, you're able to reflect the reality of humans, which is there is almost no one that is all bad. Right. In a movie, you have to like simplify things not to what can be known in somebody's mind, but what can be witnessed through people interacting. But in a book, you are able to show this is what is motivating this person. This is how they are interpreting that information, which is like a very valuable skill as an adult, a regular human, when you realize like, oh, that person isn't doing that thing to me because they're bad. They're doing that thing to me because in their model, they are getting what they want or they are avoiding what they don't want. And without an understanding of other people's minds, it's very easy to just other people to be like, nope, they're all bad.
That is fascinating. And I think that's got to be spot on. Right. And it's like politically, you talk to somebody of a different political persuasion. And, if you're liberal, you're like, oh, it's these, right wing, racists or whatever. And if you're, conservative, you're like it's these liberal commies and they're, destroying American values. But once you get to know them as people, you're like, oh, no, we actually agree on most things.
Well, that's actually one of the interesting experiences I've had with legacy interviews is because I've now done hundreds of them from people all over the United States, you can start to see regional differences and like the way that their approach to a community. So there's this band in northern Iowa, southern Minnesota of very liberal farmers. And it's really interesting, right? Because you meet a farmer and you assume like, okay, they're going to be conservative like the guy I know out in Nebraska or the guy the grain farmer I know in Illinois. But in this area, because of whatever I think a lot of them were Swedish and Finnish, and they have this much more community mindset. They do a lot of winter activities. In understanding their life stories and their approach to community and their approach to all these other things, you're like, well, obviously this person is going to have these political leanings. And it helps me understand the political leanings of somebody that's, whether it's left or right, in a very different way. And it's been fascinating to me to kind of discover this.
Yeah, because we tend to paint people in broad brushstrokes. I mean, you look at different electoral maps. You're like, oh, the cities are blue, and like you look at Missouri, Kansas City, and in general, Kansas City and St. Louis are blue, and the rest of the state's red. Well, there's a lot of blue people in the rural areas, and there's a lot of red people in the urban areas, right? So we probably overgeneralize. Have you read by Jonathan Haidt, The Righteous Mind?
Yeah, sure,
yeah. So I think that does a great job of kind of explaining the different moral bases that different people in the political spectrum have. And it's not that one's right or one's wrong. It's just valuing these different areas of morality in different amounts.
So I have been playing with a hypothesis. The longtime listeners will have heard me say this a couple times. We'll try it out on you. Like, I believe that if we look at Europe, right, and we look at the difference between, say, Catholicism and Protestantism, I think there is a reason why Protestants started in the North. And I think that it's because Protestants have a very literal approach to the Bible, right? What do the exact words say? And we're going to do what the words say. And the more Roman Catholic are more from this like, it's kind of what it says, but there's also some culture and there's tradition and there's these other things that are kind of around it. And my belief is the further north you go, the more literal you have to be to survive. You must put crops in the ground by this time. They must be out by this time. We do things in this exact way, which leads to a literalist's mind.
Yeah, and fewer growing seasons.
Fewer growing seasons. And there's not as much opportunity to mess around in any of that. Whereas the further south you go, the more people are, okay, well, we can kind of do it at this time. We have more flexibility because you're in a more Mediterranean environment. And you can see this playing out centuries later in the way that people approach things. Like I have found that more of my Protestant friends, they're not just literal about the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
They're literal about, the inputs they put into AI, the careers that they end up choosing, right? So geography having a shaping impact on culture and logic and things like that.
Wow, fascinating. So have there been studies on this?
No, this is just my latest idea that I've been throwing out to people and seeing how they feel about it. And when you tell a Protestant this, do you know what they immediately do?
What?
Start arguing with you about the definitions. I don't know. What do you mean about literal? We got to find out all this stuff. And
there's so many flavors of Protestantism as well.
It's AI has helped me explore all of this and to try and understand when did things branch, because I always thought that the hard branch was Catholics to Lutherans, but Catholics to Lutherans was just like a small branch. But once the Lutherans came on, then the Calvinists came about, and those Calvinists were way more literal than the Lutherans, who were still more in the lower Germany.
Yeah,
I could go on and on and on about.
No, it's fascinating. I think it's that's super interesting. And so, what are you? Are you religious? And if so, which?
Well, I grew up Catholic, but one generation from my father, they were Church of the Brethren, which it'd be kind of an offshoot of the Quakers. They would be Anabaptists, so they would say you should wait for baptism until you're an adult, and then you have this more of like a communal living kind of thing. So my mother is 100% Irish Catholic, and my father's side is Church of the Brethren.
Yeah, the denomination I grew up in, you didn't get baptized until you were like 12 or 13, which is right around puberty. Not a coincidence. So I think part of it has to do with the views of original sin, is my understanding. So the thought is that you aren't born sinful, you become sinful, I think, is the theory. And it would make sense around puberty is when you start becoming
the age of reason and
yes. And so, the denomination I grew up in, you were christened as a baby and then you were then baptized, versus Catholicism and others where you're baptized and then you confirm your baptism around that same age.
Yeah. What denomination?
Disciples of Christ.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is close to United Church of Christ. So Ronald Reagan was Disciples of Christ and LBJ. So,
well, that makes sense why you went to Eureka College then, because Eureka College originally was a Disciples of Christ church or a college. I don't know that it still is, but I didn't know that about Ronald.
Yeah, and I went to my freshman year of college at TCU, which is a Disciples of Christ institution.
Oh, okay.
But I am not religious.
Okay.
Anymore, and didn't take with me.
Purposefully? Did you choose?
No. So what happened is I was raised going to church every Sunday. Then there was like youth group or whatever on some weeknights and Sunday school and everything. So I was thoroughly churched. I've read most of the Bible here and there. But even in elementary school, I would look around the congregation and I would say, does everybody actually believe this? Like, I didn't believe it. And I was tortured by that. I mean, fortunately, our denomination wasn't, big on hell and fire and brimstone. But I was like, the rest of my family, they're all going to go to heaven. And I'm not, because I don't believe this. And so it was coming closer to my time of being baptized, and I went through all the classes and everything. And I was starting to get stressed. I'm like, because the way we did it is you'd stand up in front of the congregation with a few other kids of your age group, and you would declare that Jesus Christ was your Lord and Savior. And then there was this, this baptism pool that, the doors open and it was closed most of the time, but for the baptism Sunday, it was open. And then you were dunked and like you came out. And I'm like, what am I going to do? Do I stand up and I say, I do not declare this? Or do I tell the minister in advance, like, I can't do this and my family, and they're so disappointed? Or do I lie and just hope that the faith is going to come later? So it's like the day or two before my baptism, and I'm like, what am I going to do? I've been worrying about this for a year. And then my great aunt Doris, we called her Dory, said to me, John Michael, I'm so excited for your baptism, and it's going to be amazing, because after you come out of the water, everything is just going to be bright and shiny and you're going to feel God's love wash over you. It's going to be amazing. I'm like, oh, my problem is I just haven't been baptized yet. So I'm going to say I believe because I want to believe. And once I'm baptized, it's going to be fine. So I stand up in front of the congregation. I declare Jesus as my Lord and Savior. I'm the fourth or fifth kid to go. I go down. I get dunked under the water, tepid water held by the minister. I rise up. I look around and I just feel wet. And I think to my, fifth grade self or whatever it was, well, shit.
Wow.
And so every time I went to church and every time I prayed for faith. That's what I wanted to have. And I tried and it tortured me. And then when I was in my 20s, I read about Albert Einstein's, how coming up with a theory of relativity and general relativity, he would do these thought experiments. So like for special relativity, it's like, oh, he was like riding on a train that was going the speed of light and then it turned on its headlights. Like what would happen? And different things like this. I'm like, I'm going to try a thought experiment. What if it's okay if I don't believe? And I'm just going to try that on for size. And guess what happened? The heavens opened and the angels sang. And then I went on this quest and I was like, okay, if I don't believe in Christianity, I do believe that there's more to life than just the meat that we live in, right? But I don't know why. So I went and I read all these books on physics, and I read books on near-death experiences and reincarnation and ESP and telekinesis. I read books on other religions. Buddhism resonated with me somewhat. I'm definitely not a Buddhist, but so I read about all these different things, and what I've come to is I just don't know. I just don't know what happens. Is after death, does consciousness survive in some way, shape, or form, some essence of who I am? Maybe. Will I experience what I experienced before I was born, which is I don't know? Probably. And I am open to that there's something more, but I just don't know. And I'm not an atheist because I think believing that there's nothing is as hard for me as believing in Christianity. I am in this liminal space, and I know that if I had faith, like friends and family that I think have a lot of faith, it's almost like this protective armor that they wear around. And I think it helps make sense of a chaotic world. And I think it helps with the slings and arrows of human experience. And I've seen it really help people when they've lost loved ones or they're approaching the end of their lives themselves. So I think there's a lot of value to that. It's just not something I've been able to achieve. It's like, there has to be escape velocity to escape gravity. I don't have that escape velocity that I can escape into, I guess, faith.
When you're having the dialogue in your head with yourself, is there a voice that replies to you? When you're like, are you in conversation with yourself in your mind?
Yeah.
Who controls that voice?
I guess that's more that, like, I guess it's part of me. Yeah.
I think for me, like, I struggle with faith all the time. I have come to the conclusion that I don't know why it works, but but belief does work. Like that it has had tremendous value for me, if only in the last 6 months of my life, a lot of value. But the thing that always kept me from being an atheist was that discovery of that voice inside of my head. It was that, like, for most of your life, maybe, I don't know how long other people, but I was well into my 20s before I even realized that I have a dialogue in my mind with a voice that I don't control. In fact, I think most people have this dialogue and they don't even know. And so you try and do things like meditation where you're like, all right, I'm just not going to have any thoughts. And then you're like, wait, there's this thing that just keeps throwing ideas into my brain. And I'm certain you could find like a physics reason why it's there, or chemistry, or, biological reason. But what has been so interesting to me is that voice has a sentience that I am not in control of.
Yeah.
And that to me is somehow
Game
like
changer.
it's like the
Yeah.
jump between my physical body and
Yeah,
some metaphysical world.
Yeah, it's like metacognition. It's partly thinking about thinking, but it is there is a voice. I think probably everybody has it.
No. This is you'll find this very interesting. So a guy I've had on the podcast, I've brought this up before. Philosophers call that voice the daemon, right? So it is this inner core voice that you don't really have control over. You have some sort of a dialogue with it. So I was sitting next to this guy named Jared Holst. I'm talking with all these guys at this dinner, and we're talking about inner voice, and I'm actually flicking people awake for better or for worse, and them having the first realization that they have a voice. And I turn to him and I'm like, yeah, what about your voice? Do you hear that voice? He's like, no. I'm like, you don't have an inner dialogue? And he's like, no. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, I just tell myself time to get up to go exercise. I'm like, there's no voice of resistance that says, no, you should rest.
You're kidding me.
No. And he was like, no. And so for years, I thought of him as a liar. I thought of like, that is not possible. Jared is lying to me. And then I read a statistic because I was doing one of these classes and I was talking about the inner voice about what keeps you from being able to be engaged in a conversation. And there were a couple of people in there that were like, no, I don't have an inner voice.
Wow.
And then I went and looked it up. 10% of the population doesn't have
kidding.
it. Yeah. So 90% is walking around with a voice that they can dialogue with. And there's 10% that has no voice at all.
Wow.
Which, how different would your experience of being a human be if you didn't have that voice?
Totally different. My inner voice is named Kiefer. Okay, so my there's this thought, there's a saying that there's no atheists in foxholes, right? So, it was distressing to my parents, particularly my mother, my lack of faith, right? And I even said to them, like, don't you feel bad that you so thrust your views of the world and faith on me that for decades I was tortured by my lack of faith? And like, you were never... you were like, faith is a struggle, but they're just like, no, because this is what we believe and we wish you believe this too. And, like, we're going to pray for you or whatever. But they did say, you will come to it, particularly if, you have some sort of, if one of your kids gets sick or your wife or yourself or whatever. So here's how I know that's probably not the case. So I was on a business trip in 2007. And I was flying on a Southwest flight from Islip, New York, Long Island, to Midway, then further on to St. Louis. And I was reading the book, The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb, that had just come out. And what a black swan is, for anybody listening that doesn't know what it is, in addition to being a bird, it is the concept that unpredictable, extraordinary things happen, and they happen all the time. The phrase comes from the fact that in Europe, there's only white swans, so they had hundreds of millions of data points. Swans are only white. They discover Australia, and how many data points of a black swan did it take to overturn those 100 million observations? One black swan. And they have black swans in Australia, so it overturned it. And a black swan is something that has three parts. One, it's unpredictable. Two, it has a huge effect. And three, it's explainable in retrospect. So you think about like 9/11, unpredictable, had this huge effect. Then the 9/11 Commission, of course, explained exactly how it could happen. But in his book, he has this story of this turkey. And he shows it on a chart that for the 1,000 days of this turkey's life, its farmer fed it, watered it, deloused it or whatever. And this turkey's thinking, man, if turkey could think like this, this farmer is great. It's like my best friend, my caregiver. And then on day 1,001, right before Thanksgiving, his head is chopped off, right? So there's nothing in the 1,000 days that clued this turkey in to that this person was going to kill him for food. And I read that. And I was like, that's profound. And I shut the book. I'm on this plane. And I thought, that's so many aspects of my life. For instance, flying. I've been on hundreds of flights. And like as a child or a teenager, I used to get stressed about like flying. But now like I fall asleep on takeoff, my blood pressure, my pulse doesn't raise at all. But it really means nothing because this could be the flight. And while I'm thinking that, the plane shudders and there was a noise and we start coming down altitude-wise. Like 30 or 60 seconds later, the pilot comes on and says, everything's okay. Do not be alarmed. but our left side or starboard engine or whatever has stopped working. So we're going to land in Indianapolis because it's close and it has a long runway. But everything's going to be okay. So people start crying, pulling out rosaries, praying or whatever. And at this point in time, and of course I'm worried about, well, maybe it's something that would cause us to lose the other engine. And that would be a more difficult situation. My thought was, the universe has been around 14, 15 billion years and has another however long it's going to run. Earth has another, 4 or 5 billion years. Whether I live, at the time, 37 years or 97 years, my life is still a blip and it probably doesn't matter. I will miss seeing my kids grow up and everything else, but such is life. And I didn't pray. I did not pray. I did not turn or try to find faith at that moment. So the plane, anyway, you could tell that things were a little weird not having both engines. We land in Indianapolis. There's fire trucks and emergency vehicles. When we land, people are crying and clapping and everything's wonderful and whatever. So we pull up to the gate. The flight attendant comes on and says, another round of applause for our amazing pilot who landed this with just one engine. And everybody's like cheering and going nuts. He said, okay, now let me tell you what's going to happen. So you're all going to get off and I want you just to stay in the waiting area. And we're going to have a mechanic come and there's probably just some little fix that needs to be done to this engine. And then we're going to put you back on the plane and we're going to fly to Chicago. And there's this dead silence. And she goes, just kidding. And I'll tell you, there's something about the culture of a company that a flight attendant, because Southwest, of course, is known for these sort of funny things, that a flight attendant would say this after this extraordinary event. Because one of my coworkers' husbands at the time worked for Boeing. And the fact that this happened, he and a team were sent to Indianapolis to go look at what happened, right? Or maybe it wasn't Boeing. He worked for GE, and because it was a GE engine, because it was so extraordinary. And 2 years later, I was sitting on a Southwest flight next to a Southwest pilot who was deadheading, and I asked, I was on this plane that lost an engine. He's like, "Oh yes, the one from Long Island, landed it." Like everybody in the company knew about it. It was so rare. And I asked him, I was like, "So if you were flying that plane, and let's say you're at like 35,000 feet, and you'd lost both engines, what are the chances you could have landed it safely with both engines going?" And he said, 98%. He's like, "We trained for this in the simulator. We trained for losing one engine. We trained for losing both engines." So I went and looked it up and I wrote a blog post on this. And airliners do glide. So like a 737 will go something like 7 feet horizontal for every foot vertical it loses without power. So you can just do the math. If you're at 35,000 feet, how many feet do you have? And there are numerous examples of airliners losing all 2, 3, 4 engines and landing safely. There's not many because it doesn't happen a whole lot.
And these experiences had proved to you that you did not have a.
Oh, you're bringing it back around?
Turn to, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And I've had health scares, and no, I do not turn to praying or faith. I had blood clots in my leg and 2 in my lung, pulmonary embolism, and has like a 1/3 mortality rate. And yeah, I didn't.
I think for me, and I just met with a good buddy of mine, Protestant, that he like abjectly opposed to this way of thinking. This for me, the Lord and Savior part of Christianity is important, but there is this synchronizing effect of going to church with people, with singing with people, with being around them that to me would be enough, right? Like that is, it has taught me that like being there, harmonizing, synchronizing with other people is enough. And whether I do or do not believe in the sanctity of everything is not as important to me as the value of the sanctity. Now, my Protestant friends, they're in their trucks right now. Their heads are exploding. Yeah. They're really upset about this. But like, that's me being as honest as I can be. Like,
Yeah.
there is tremendous value in synchronizing with people. And I would say, as a result of synchronizing with people, my inner voice that I have at church probably better represents God and is probably closer to helping me strive to be better than otherwise.
I think that there's probably a lot of truth and power to this. And in my book on wealth and happiness, I of course hit the power of faith and spirituality, because the research is unequivocal. People that are religious or spiritual are happier and feel greater life satisfaction than those that don't. And part of the explanation is community. That didn't use synchronization. I know it's what you're talking about is somewhat different, but part of it is community. And then part of it is the faith itself that has. So I know that if I had faith, I would have this greater peace or life satisfaction or happiness about my day.
Would you choose it if you could?
Yes.
You would choose.
Yes.
And so the not having faith is not, it's like, hey, I tried, I wanted it, and it just didn't come.
Yeah. No, if it came, I mean, it's hard now because like you start to adopt different identities, right? And so like I've been vegan for 24 years. So like that has become part of my identity. I'm not atheist, so I don't feel like I have like this strong belief, but your question is a good one. Is my non-believing core to my identity now? And I do think it is part of my worldview. It's hard for me to imagine being able to flip a switch and all of a sudden having faith and believe. But yeah, I think if I could do so, I would choose it.
Fascinating. Yeah, I think for me, I chose to be an atheist for quite a few years, and then came back to the church in that, like, I was like, things need to be better. This is one thing I know that my father did that worked. Yeah. And then as I've been on that path, I've been like, oh, actually, there's a lot here that I didn't understand and I hadn't contemplated. I remember when I was a kid, one time, I don't know why I said this to my dad, but I remember being like, Dad, if I could choose one thing, I would have the faith of a child in God. My dad was like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Why would you want that? Yeah. That then you could be tricked. Then you could be told these fanciful things. The far more sophisticated thing is to come with an adult mind and to find and appreciate and figure out what it is that you really believe. And I remember, scoffing at that, because I was when I was a kid, I was pretty into God, and then not, and then coming back. And to me, this is another example of why I'm so curious about other people. Not that what you decide would change me, but like, how does that mind work? How do other people approach these things?
Yeah, it comes back to like theory of mind of like, oh, other people have these differing views.
Yeah, and I think the people that I find frustrating, this is for my Protestant buddies that I know are going to call me, is that when the benefit of Catholicism being non-literal is that it is so much easier to discuss the nuances and have slightly different opinions. Mm-hmm. Whereas in Protestantism, if you step slightly outside of it, I think the Garden of Eden, or the earth wasn't created in 7 days, that was a metaphor and not literal, then they're like, you, sir, are outcast, get out. And so to me, Catholics can have a much more robust, interesting discussion because there's so much more hard line among literal
I'll tell you, the
Protestants.
Disciples of Christ I was raised in doesn't take that literal belief, and it's Protestant.
I should probably be more specific. The Presbyterians.
Yeah, there you go. Right? Yeah, the evangelicals.
No, but even them, like the Presbyterian, like you're totally right. It's a big spectrum, and they're like, when you say, it's very difficult to say anything about Protestants because they keep slicing and making further and further distinctions. And
but again, like I've said to my parents before, so they'll be like, there's many avenues, there's many avenues up to the peak of a mountain. There's multiple rivers flow to the same sea. So that's kind of their view of there can be different ways that salvation is achieved in different beliefs. I mean, they don't believe that literally that everybody that's a Buddhist or whatever is not going to find salvation. So they're more nuanced. But I've said to them before, like but how do you pick and choose? How do you decide that John 3:16 is literally true, but these other things are open to interpretation? Like how do you say my faith rests on the Bible, but not decide pick and choose which things you interpret and you say that are metaphors, or which things, much of the Old Testament, oh, that's just historical. Yeah, those are just myths, and we can ignore most of those things. And people that like to chirp at people that have faith and rely on the Bible, all the stuff about like, oh, well, you're unclean and this and that, and you should stone your wife if she has an affair, all those things. I think people like to chirp at the literal Bible, and my parents are just like, oh, well, the Old Testament is just kind of a bunch of stories, and it's really the New Testament, and even then we're going to pick and choose. And part of me is like, well, how do you do that? How do you have faith then if you're like, well, I'm going to pick some things and not others? So like I have some, I will say, begrudging respect for the Bible literalists. I mean, I don't know how they do that. And I mean, I think they have to just turn themselves into pretzels constantly. But I do have some begrudging respect for saying, yes, if I'm going to believe the Bible, it's all true. But then I wonder about the fragility. Is it like you pull one thing down and does it, and it's why they will so adamantly say, oh, yeah, it was created in, 6 days and then God rested. I mean, if you pull that down, does their faith crumble? Is it that fragile, or should it be more robust or even anti-fragile, like more like my parents' is? I don't know.
Well, all I know is these last few months has been such an interesting ride to explore and to have conversations with people, and probably always will be. Well, John, if people were interested in the things that you've been sharing today and talking about, where should they go to stay in contact with you?
So I actually have a website, and it's Jennings.com. On there, I have my blog called Interesting Fact of the Day, which I haven't written for about a year and a half, but it has a lot of interesting things. But it has information on my first book, The Uncertainty Solution, and we'll have information on my next book when it comes out here in the next probably 9 months.
Well, man, thank you so much for coming by.
Yeah, thanks, man. Always a pleasure.
Okay, that's going to do it for this week's show. Thank you so much for hanging around. As we go out, I'm going to play a little video that describes the interest-based communications class I have. If you are interested in taking the course for yourself, then we do have a class coming up at the end of August and have a few seats left. So you can find out more by going to articulate.ventures/IBC. All right, we'll be back next week with another interesting conversation.
My name is Heath Hunter. I'm a managing director at Broadview Group. In our business, your success is dependent on how you're able to effectively tell your story, to relate to your customer or your potential partners. And we needed a course that could train our staff on how to do that. I was looking for something much less than what Vance delivered. I literally just wanted him to come in and help us a little bit with storytelling. And he came back with this curriculum, which was awesome. How to craft a memorable introduction, build a story around our firm and how we personally weave into that story. How do we continue the conversation through asking good questions? How to negotiate in a collaborative way versus a competitive way, so that we maintain that relationship that we've worked so hard to build.
Our relationships are everything. To me, interest-based communication is really understanding the perspectives and the point of view of others, being able to meet them where they are.
Interest-based communication to me is creating a dialogue with someone else sitting across the table from you.
It allows each party to really describe what they care about and work together to accomplish that for each party.
A lot of people, myself included, before I took Vance's class, really went in with higher weight on what was important to me.
Everybody has a tendency to just focus in on the price, but there are hundreds of other components that come into something as complex as a transaction for a company.
What are they actually interested in? What do they hope to achieve? And what does success look like for them walking out of a negotiation? Those could differ widely from how they're showing up.
If we can somehow get on the same page, you can create these collaborative solutions that are a win for everyone. We've definitely woven that into the process. We're trying to ask those deep probing questions on what are their motivations, what do they care about?
Really understanding who they are, introducing yourself to better communicate who you are and your background.
What makes a good introduction? This is something that I really appreciated. I mean, I've been in the workforce for 27 plus years and done lots of introductions. I've heard lots of introductions.
Making a good introduction, I think everyone just assumes that you should just kind of start talking about yourself and go into your title and what you do. And frankly, that's typically not very memorable or interesting. Going through this course and learning about storytelling and the arc of a story and how to embed that in your introduction was honestly like nothing I had ever heard before. And it makes a lot of sense, right? Because if you're a good storyteller, you tend to sort of capture an audience, and you want to be able to do that with your introduction, sort of that hook that you need in a story.
For me, the big thing was having faith that sitting back and really paying attention to the conversation will help draw out a connection. Before, I would spend my time trying to, okay, what do I have in common with this person? Oh yeah, this is a chance to interject and establish that link. Ironically, just kind of stepping back and saying, I'm just gonna really pay attention to what's in front of me. It really has impacted the conversation because you can get deeper faster.
I used to think it was all about how interesting I could come across. But what I've learned, and honestly what Vance taught us, the most interesting folks that you run across ask really good questions.
That's been a game changer for me. Instead of trying to focus on myself, focusing fully on the other person, and really just listening for like, what are the details that they're giving me? Because there's a reason that they mention that.
We assume that folks can kind of see what we see in our heads. And what this course taught us about diagramming your ideas is to put it on paper, put it out there so the other parties can see it.
We were meeting with a group that week, and we were trying to communicate different ideas and outline a vision for this potential business. Instead of doing it in a PowerPoint format, we did it on a whiteboard. It was transformational.
The CEO, he just lit up. We actually handed the pen over to him. We said, hey, show us where we've got it wrong, or show us where you have additional ideas. The level of engagement, we went through the roof, and he got up and you could see he was almost giddy.
Having that limiter of the speed of your hand, you're bringing them along in your idea you're trying to convey.
So the practicality of the course, the mirroring, the diagramming, the exercises, I think that's one of the things that I appreciated most about the course. Super candidly, I've been through a lot of these in my career, and you walk out of there and you're like, well, that was a waste of time. What I can tell you about what Vance brought to the table, I at no point ever felt that way. I was able to walk out of every single session and put to work immediately what we had practiced that day.
He has a great way of connecting concepts so that you have this, holistic framework, so to speak, to connect with people, which is something that we do all the time, but deliberate practice of it really helped up my game.
I would recommend that everyone take this course, and I would venture to say that this has been more impactful for me at home than at work. Pretty much everybody is having conversations and negotiations at home. I feel super lucky and blessed that we were able to have this course at work and that it sort of bleeds into home life. I think that's kind of the best of both worlds.
Any corporation or any firm, no matter what the size, I think would benefit from something like this.
Who I'd recommend this to is a small group of professionals who are really dedicated to self-improvement.
Interest-based communication to me is a holistic way to build relationships. It can benefit anyone.